Hi, Vaidurya.
Hi, sir. Best of luck to all of us.
Yes, all the best, all the best. Sandeep.
Yeah.
Connect.
I would like to invite Dr. Sriram Gopal Krishnan, our director at SCMC, to address the gathering and welcome the guests. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Greetings to all and welcome to Pramāna 2021, an international conference organized by the Symbiosis Center for Media and Communications, Symbiosis International University. The theme of the Pramāna conference is a fresh perspective on the tectonic shifts happening all around us at a very difficult time for the world. Pramāna, or a means of knowledge, serves as one of the core concepts in Indian epistemology. Contrary to popular opinion, a majority of the ancient Indian philosophical schools were rationalistic, non-theistic, and atheistic. Sort of like either a studied silence or a radical opposition to the concept of the divinity or the unproven. Only one school, the Purva Mimamsa or Vedanta, is theistic. Pramāna is also a means of questioning popular assumptions, popular ideologies, and popular mindsets. You would agree that the questioning of popular opinion is vital at a time when there is an infinite number of opinions. An infinite number of opinions without the benefit of research going viral in the digital world. To fight this, a researcher has just one option. In response to an infinite number of opinions, the researcher can only build an infinite number of hypotheses to question them. Such questioning is all the more important in a polarized world where the internet threatens to mutate into several national internets, all attempting to build alternative realities. Increasingly, large nations want to fence off the internet into a national cyber territory, which is with nationalistic tendencies. That is more rhetorical than real. The internet itself has delivered something like a digital apex predator in the form of social echo chambers. Recently, the Australian Prime Minister called it a palace of cowards of abuse, which is a significant statement. Of course, on a lighter side, some would say quite rich, coming from down under, where many cricket teams have been at the receiving end of some fine-tuned sledging by the Aussies. And nevertheless, the Australians play some outstanding cricket in between. So we are sort of willing to forgive them for their colorful epithets in the field. Many governments are looking at legislating digital companies in their own geographies. After all, the DNA of every government is to collect taxes, without which there's no reason for their existence. The pandemic has taught us lessons on how to adapt, how to compromise, how to perhaps learn to live together. The pandemic has also taught the governments on how to control, letting loose their inherent authoritarian streak in many places. We need to question such contemporary trends. We need to stop and take a snapshot of what's happening all around us. Ask questions, find answers. The reason for Pramāna is precisely that. I would like to first welcome our respected Vice Chancellor, Dr. Rajni Gupte. She has been singularly responsible for spearheading the transformation of the Symbiosis International University into a research-oriented one. She has motivated and driven all the faculty to continuously raise the bar in research and consultancy. Today, Symbiosis University continues to go up in virtually all international rankings for research. An administrator, a legendary researcher, a director on the board of several corporates in India, and a panel member of many government and statutory bodies. Welcome, Dr. Rajni ma'am. I would like to welcome Dr. Nico Carpentier, extraordinary professor, Prague University, one of the leading global experts on media subjects and effects. Dr. Nico works at Prague, but impacts the world community through his vibrant, inclusive, and visionary leadership of the International Association of Mass Communication Research. His contributions in strengthening the academic voice of the global communication research community is truly laudable. I extend a warm welcome to Mr. Apar Gupta, Executive Director, Internet Freedom Foundation. He is a leading advocate on digital rights, digital media news, IT governance, and data privacy. He is in the front line of the legal battle on internet freedom and fighting against the debilitating impact of the social media conglomerates which are ruling our lives. Precisely at a time when it is easy to curtail rights, we have Mr. Apar Gupta fighting the good fight for freedom. I welcome Dr. Srinivas Melkote, Professor Emeritus, Bowling Green University, a renowned professor in research and author of several widely cited books and research papers in development communication. Dr. Melkote remains committed to media education in India, and despite his busy schedule, always finds time to mentor and share his wisdom, experience, and insights to teachers, researchers, and students in India and in many countries. Dr. Joseph Bock, Kennesaw University, is a well-published academic in the area of conflict and media in the changing digital world. An accomplished researcher and eminent writer, he has been in the forefront of subaltern narratives for inclusivity. I extend a warm welcome to Dr. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Zia Haq, KSU from Atlanta, a leading researcher in peace building and development through media effects. Dr. Narendra, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, Osmania University, has been a well-known name in the media education sector with a formidable repertoire on a wide range of subjects. He is a national expert on contemporary communication studies, a well-published writer and author of several highly acclaimed books. I extend a warm welcome to Dr. Narendra. Dr. Ruchi Karjagi, our Dean, Faculty of Media and Communication, is a strong voice in the international communication research community. Her research accomplishments are quite numerous, and she has led our team to bag many international research projects that have translated to seminal work in the field. As Dean, she has shaped the Faculty of Communication in Symbiosis into a vibrant group focused on research, consultancy, industry academia interface, and new age learning strategies. Welcome, Dr. Ruchi. We have our very own Dr. Preeti Raghunath, a young trailblazing academic and researcher. She is soon joining Monash University and has already made her mark on media policy analysis, which has a significant impact. Welcome, Dr. Preeti. We have received excellent response from researchers, academics, and students to Pramāna. I would like to welcome all the paper presenters and speakers at this conference. We have received over 500 registrations to the conference, and I take the opportunity of welcoming all the participants who have made this conference what it is. This conference would not have been possible without my colleagues at SCMC who have done all the hard work. Before I close, I would like to acknowledge their contributions to Pramāna 2021. I once again welcome everyone to the conference and thank you for your gracious presence and patronage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Next, I'd like to request Dr. Ruchi Khejagi ma'am to take the dais for the special address. Ma'am is a professor and director of Sembacis Institute of Media and Communication, and also the Dean of Faculty of Media and Communication at Sembacis International Deemed University. She's been working in higher education for 2 decades now. Her research interests include media representations, children and media, popular culture analysis, television studies, journalism studies, media literacy, streaming platforms, and emerging discourses of identity on new media. She's also been awarded the Women Leadership Award in 2018 and 2020 respectively. Ma'am is also the Vice Chair of Media Education Research Section of the International Association of Media and Communication Research. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, Joey. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Good morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good morning. A very good morning to Dr. Rajni Gupte, our VC, the ever-encouraging Vice Chancellor one would always aspire to have. Thank you, Dr. Sriram, for inviting me and making a part of the debut conference that Symbiosis Center of Media and Communication is organizing. I think in that sense, it's a moment of reckoning because an undergraduate communication school in the country taking such leap of faith to mainstream conversations, so academic, and put their focus on research. I don't think we could look at this in any other way at the moment. So thank you so much for making me part of it. I'm really grateful that so many young students are today a part of this discussion that's going to go on for the next 2 days, and these are really long days. And the very, very illustrious lineup of speakers that Pramāna 2021 promises. Somebody like Dr. Nico Carpentier, who we all look up to, who in a lot of ways has democratized the way research, scholarship, and opportunities should be extended to the larger academic community. I'm sure that when you all listen to him, you can just be more and more inspired. You know, I have had the good fortune of meeting him at a couple of conferences earlier and have always come back extremely inspired and wanting to do something, not just for your own personal research, but also extend that support, the larger support that the young media academic community and young media scholars need. So I don't think that I would be able to do justice to the kind of conversations in the next 10 minutes that this conference promises to have. So I thought I will take this opportunity to give you all a little overview of the Faculty of Media and Communication at the Symbiosis International Deemed University. Also talk about the kind of research and scholarship that we are pursuing here. And of course, Dr. Sriram already mentioned about the kind of ecosystem that is now being created under the leadership of our Vice Chancellor, in the way faculty, research scholars, and a lot of students are focusing on mainstreaming very significant conversations, critical conversations with a scholarly dimension. To just give you an idea, we are 4 schools right now under the Faculty of Media and Communication under the aegis of Symbiosis International Deemed University. Symbiosis Center of Media and Communication, which is today the host of Pramāna 2021, is our undergraduate school and offer a Bachelor in Media Studies program. This school has consistently ranked as the #1 undergrad media school in the country. Their alumni are in almost every sphere of not just the media industry, but have also pursued their higher studies at most of the Ivy League universities in the world. We also have another undergraduate school under the Faculty of Media and Communication, which is our Sembacis School of Visual Arts and Photography. The school right now focuses on competency and skill building, primarily with a lot of focus on different domains in photography. But over the last 1 year in particular, they have taken huge strides to have a large focus on visual communication in particular, with focus on sculpture, painting, architecture. And I think that journey has just begun, and we hope to see a lot coming out from that space. In addition to that, we also have our postgraduate school, the Symbiosis School of Media and Communication, based out of Bangalore. This school offers an MBA program in communication management with specializations in brand communication, public relations, and media management. The school has been in existence now for over a decade, and that is one of our off-campus center outside Pune. And the fourth school, which also I head as the director, is the Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication, which is the oldest school under the Faculty of Media and Communication, having completed 31 years of its journey now, and offers 2 master's programs, one in mass communication with specializations in journalism and audiovisual, and the other is an MBA in communication management with specializations in brand communication, PR, media management, marketing, and media analytics. Now, this is something, this is an all-encompassing overview of the whole faculty and the kind of things we do. But since this is a very, very academic, scholarship and research-based context, I would also like to talk about our very, very vibrant PhD program that works under the Faculty of Media and Communication. Currently, in the Faculty of Media and Communication at Symbiosis, we have over 50 research scholars pursuing their PhD with us in different domains. And I think this program is just gaining so much of traction over the last few years as we continue to get more and more applications for younger scholars, people who are thinking about further maybe, sort of a career trajectory towards academia. Also, a lot of industry professionals who are coming to us who want to do a PhD. And the major areas in which the scholars within the Faculty of Media Communication work in include journalism studies, film and culture studies, television studies, community media, consumer behavior studies. Right now, we have a lot of focus on research that's shaping up in the space of streaming platforms. That's a lot of work that students have been picking up from so many different dimensions, from dimensions of culture, identity, cultures of consumption perspectives, but also from business perspectives. In addition to that, we've been working significantly in areas on media industries in particular and visual communication. We are one of the 3 programs currently in the country which offer a practice-based PhD. And I think that is one of the highlights of our PhD program. So in India, there are only 2 other universities. That is, one is Jamia and the other is the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, besides Symbiosis International Deemed University, which offer a practice-based PhD track. In a practice-based PhD track, right now we have a scholar who is pursuing his PhD with us, where the eventual output of his PhD is going to be a full-fledged documentary film. Of course, it comes with a thesis and everything, but it's these are illustrious filmmakers, national award-winning filmmakers who have these pathways laid down for them. And I think I'm very proud when I say this, that the environment at the university is such that we were able to make such a courageous move, and we received all the support and also the expertise from the already established universities like TIS and Jamia who were pursuing it, who advised on how to take it forward. And I think at the moment, both TIS and Jamia have still not had the first thesis still submitted, which we are hoping we might be the first ones to kind of see it through. But I think that's an extremely supportive, constructive sort of a pathway for a lot of young people from a creative field like media who would like to use their work as the material to conduct research in very, very practice-based ways. In fact, Dr. Nico Carpentier, who's the keynote speaker today, recently with a few co-authors has produced a fantastic text on practice-based work in media and the kind of critical research potential something like that has. So I think in that sense, we look at ourselves as a very progressive space which would like to create opportunities of research and scholarship, not just from very, very theoretical and traditional and conventional points of view, but through very, very unconventional means like the practice-based PhD track. In addition to that, Symbiosis, as you're all aware, has significant number of collaborations with different foreign universities, international agencies, and as part of the university, the Faculty of Media and Communication has consistently benefited from these collaborations. In fact, one of our recent grants, one of the biggest grants which came to the Faculty of Media and Communication was in collaboration with Salisbury University, USA, where a group of 5 faculty members along with 2 professors from Salisbury University, USA received the $100,000 grant from the United States India Educational Foundation, USIEF, who also sponsor Fulbright scholarships. And they did like the first ever creation of curriculum and even implementation of a curriculum in interactive documentary filmmaking. In addition to that, in the past, under the Faculty of Media and Communication, we have earlier had 2 international conferences in media and communication in 2018 and 2016 and 2018 respectively. And why I want to talk about those as well, because I think we have always demonstrated a deep commitment to creating a culture of research, scholarship, and inspiring our young students to be a part of these conversations. And I think even then, like I see like such an encouraging response in terms of the number of students who are joining the Zoom session right now. But I think this is something that drives us. Even in the earlier 2 editions of the conference, there was a very, very vibrant emerging scholars section where young students, PhD scholars presented their work and were actually given very critical feedback from very, very top-notch scholars, with a global stature. In addition to that, I think eventually through all these endeavors, through creating this ecosystem, through moving forward, we at Sembacis International University largely, and focal area being media and communication from us, from the faculty, we would like to make significant contributions to scholarship and get more and more academic and scholarship legitimacy to our discipline. I think that is something that we continue to sometimes struggle with, because this discipline in that sense is a melange, is a quiche of influences from all other disciplines. I think there has been over the last 100 years, a huge conversation about like the purity, the legitimacy of media communication as an academic discipline, too much of focus on professional competencies. And hence we seem to sometimes just deal with these existential questions as to where are we? Are we catering to the industry? Is the course professional? Is it scholarship? I think we are one domain where we have the best of everything. I think it can all just come together and lead to some very meaningful conversations, which can create some actual impact on the society. I don't think that we kind of acknowledge it enough. We keep using terms like mediatization of our lives. I think we now need to come to a realization that media is no longer another dimension that influences our life. This is the way we now exist. This is the way we live our lives. And therefore, conversations around the critical context that media provides to our lives are extremely important, again, from very sharp academic perspectives. I think in this endeavor, I think the Vice Chancellor, the Pro-Chancellor, all have been encouraging. And there are some thoughts, there are some aspirations that eventually at the Symbiosis International Deemed University, we might be able to establish a center of excellence in media and communication research in the long run. Dr. Sriram already mentioned that, but our colleagues here, the faculty members, young scholars are part of very, very prolific international media associations like International Association of Media and Communication Research, International Communication Association, the Asian Media and Information Center, and also now the newly established Indian Association of Media and Communication Educators. I think with this sort of a support, this sort of an exposure and the willingness and drive of our colleagues, our younger scholars, and the support of the university, I think we can only hope to go further from here. And I think SCMC's Pramāna 2021 is again an endorsement of this commitment that the Faculty of Media and Communication has towards the prospect of research, scholarship, and sort of creating a mark for themselves to be pioneers in creating strong conversations about media, about communication and scholarship around that in India and outside India. So on that note, I'd like to express my gratitude to Dr. Sriram Gopal Krishnan and the faculty team and the whole team of SCMC, the students here, for having given me this opportunity to at least share a few thoughts that we all constantly brainstorm about in terms of the direction that research should take under the Faculty of Media and Communication. I also take this opportunity to once again thank Dr. Gupta for gracing this occasion and always encouraging us to take these steps. And on that note, I wish SCMC Pramāna 2021 a huge success. I wish you all really reinvigorating conversations, stimulating discussions, and I'm sure that we are all looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those words of encouragement, enlightenment. I'm sure, your conversations, the entire, discussions that we've been having about where we are and where do we go from here. And actually, the courage to take up these conversations in a more academic, more scholarship orientation. That way, I think it's been a few years that I've been experiencing that, and it's come a long way where our discussions in terms of research and professional acumen are coming into the classrooms, and the fact that students are here is also a very big reflection on that. So thank you so much for your continuous support. Next, I'd like to request Dr. Rajni Gupta ma'am for her inaugural address. Thank you so much, ma'am, for gracing us today. Dr. Rajni Gupta is the Vice Chancellor of Sembacis International Deemed University, a doctorate degree holder in economics from the prestigious Gokhale Institute of Economics and Politics, Pune. Ma'am has been actively engaged with higher education for over 30 years, both as a professor and researcher, and has taught at many foreign universities. She's been a part of the leadership team at Symbiosis for over 2 decades. A capable institution builder, Dr. Gupta has also earlier held the positions of Dean, Faculty of Management, Dean Academics, and Pro Vice Chancellor at Symbiosis International Deemed University. She's an independent director on governing bodies of NSDL and L&T Finance Holdings, and has served on various committees, including World Trade Organization, among many others. She's also served on committees appointed by UGC and on working groups of higher education. Dr. Gupta is one of the 10 women selected from across Asia who have attended the Women in University Administration program sponsored by the US Department of State. She was invited to be a part of a committee of eminent economists formed by the Niti Aayog to interact with the Honorable Prime Minister on economic policy, the road ahead, in January 2018, and has recently been invited by Niti Aayog to be the consultation group of experts for the education vertical. Ma'am has received several awards for her outstanding contribution to education, including Visionary Edu Leader of India for being an institution builder at the hands of Shri Pranab Mukherjee, former President of India, among many others. We're delighted to have you, ma'am, and we're eager to hear from you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much. A very good morning to everyone present here. I think let me begin by adding to the words of welcome that Dr. Sriram gave in the beginning. My warm welcome to Professor Nico Carpentier, if he is here, from the Charles University, Professor Srinivas Melkote, Dr. Joseph Bock, Dr. Zia Haq, Apar Gupta, all the other keynote speakers and eminent speakers from across the country who are joining in here, all the paper presenters, the faculty from the Symbiosis Center for Media and Communication, SIMC, Dr. Ruchi Kherjagi, and Dr. Sriram. A very, very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Symbiosis International University. You know, as this conference began, I went down memory lane, and I remembered how a few years ago, when we started talking about research and taking research forward, we looked at the research output of the university, and we realized that the Faculty of Media and Communication was one that could do a lot more. And that was when we started talking to the Dean of the Faculty of Media and Communication, and we tried to make sure that they started contributing to the research output of the university. This was taken up extremely seriously after Dr. Ruchi became the Dean. And I think she has made a significant contribution to making sure that everyone understands the importance of research and builds it into their own curriculums. So I think, Dr. Ruchi, thank you so much. You also spoke about how the research program, the PhD program, has been strengthened now at the university. I didn't know that we had 50 scholars. I thought they were about 20, 30, but 50 is a great number. It also shows us that a large number of young people are now getting drawn towards this domain and are feeling that there is a need for scholarship. Not that there wasn't earlier. It was just that possibly research, PhD was seen as a purely theoretical domain and something that only professors would indulge in or theoreticians would indulge in. As you so rightly pointed out, in domains like media and communication, one needs to think differently. One needs to think out of the box. And that's how our research by practice, PhD by practice, actually came up. Thinking about how the work that goes into creating something requires so much research and effort. So why is it not possible for someone to document it all, to put it all together in the form of a treatise, and of course, also come up with some other kind of an output. Dr. Ruchi spoke about a documentary film coming out of the first possibly student who will be completing his PhD from this domain. So these are really very encouraging signs that we see around us. And I'm very delighted to tell all of you that the output from the Faculty of Media and Communication today makes me very happy, makes me smile, and makes me think that, yes, we have made an impact. We have made a good beginning. And I'm sure that the grants that are coming in are a recognition of the good work that is being done. The international collaborations, the work that is happening, the work that is getting recognized across the globe is something that is truly something that is commendable. Dr. Sriram, thank you so much for thinking of Pramāna 21. When you actually came to me and spoke about it, I had the reaction much like Dr. Ruchi, that at the undergraduate level, for the faculty and the students to get involved in research, it cannot get better than this. And I think this is something that hats off to you for thinking of this, for bringing it on, and for making sure that we have scholars from across the world and India, so many paper presenters, and on topics that are so incredibly interesting. You know, media is something that all of us relate to. It's the press was really known as the fourth estate after the nobility, the church, and the commoners. The press is often called the fourth estate. And with that comes a huge sense of responsibility. To my mind, press is often called a watchdog. And when you say a watchdog, I think the press has a huge responsibility to make sure that it addresses this role with all seriousness. You also spoke about questioning popular opinion. You said, Dr. Sriram mentioned that Pramāna is actually questioning, trying to find the proof for the popular opinion, which can only be based on scientific research, on logical reasoning. And all of this is something that's possible through scholarship and research. This is something that I'm glad that this domain is now encompassing. And I'm sure that all the wonderful topics that you have laid out before you, I was fascinated. I wish I could attend all of these sessions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do that. But when you spoke of creativity and communication in digital media, there seems to be no end to the kind of things that are happening in the, in the convergence of IT, technology, media. It's so fascinating to see the kind of growth that's happening and the impact that can have on people. Talking about more serious things, identities and the digital caste, region, nation. You spoke just now about how countries are becoming more insular and trying to wall themselves off from the rest of the world. China is a great example of trying to keep itself and keep its, keep access to the internet. I was reading about how children are now going to be allowed to have only 3 hours a week of access to the internet. So these are the kinds of things that influence cultures, people, the way they start thinking, and truly, this is something that needs really a deep understanding. So I'm sure all the paper presenters and people present here are going to have a feast ahead of them, listening to all these wonderful topics. Let me just end by just saying that when we talk about legislating and when we talk about creating, ring fencing the kind of influence that media can have, somewhere I think it's important that because of the huge impact that media has on all of us, media should understand its own responsibility. And I think this sense of responsibility, as we as educators need to build that sense of responsibility. When we train young
Ma'am, your mic is mute, ma'am.
Sorry, I think I got cut for a moment.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I wish the conference every success. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Under your patronage, under your guidance, I'm sure starting today, we'll have a lot of invigorating conversations and take a step further into the world of research as undergraduate school here. I'm sure we're all, doing well. We'll have a lot of encouragement from you going forward. So thank you so much, ma'am, for your words of encouragement. Next, let me allow you to take you through the program that we have from now on. This entire day, we'll start with the keynote session, which is our spotlight session, wherein we'll have Dr. Nico Carpentier, Mr. Apar Gupta, and Dr. Preeti Raghunath address us with their ideas, with their perspectives in the world of media and communication. Post which we'll have a lunch break, and we'll have 3 more further tracks wherein paper presentations from faculties, from researchers across the world come in and talk about their research and present their papers. We'll conclude the evening with another special session with Dr. Narendra from Osmania University as well. And we have speakers as well from the Bowling University. So let's break for another 20 minutes and resume at 11 o'clock. Thank you so much for attending this session.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sriram. Thank you. Thank you.
We are going for a break now, ma'am, and then we'll start with the conference.
Yeah,
thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sriram. All the best.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Carpentier, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Baidura Chakravarti. I've been writing to you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So yes, if you want to check the screen sharing and the presentation, please go ahead and do it.
Okay.
No problem.
Thanks. I'll cancel somebody else's screen share, but I suppose that's not a terrible thing to do.
That's all right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, here we are. That seems to be fine. Voila, you should have full screen.
Yeah, it is.
Then I will stop my screen share and continue having my coffee because it's a bit early here.
Okay, so we'll start in 15 minutes.
Well, I'll stay online. I'll switch off the camera, but I'll keep connected.
Thank you so much. See you.
See you in a minute.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to SCMC's first International Research Conference, Pramāna 2021. As we begin with the next session, which is the conference spotlight, I'd like to remind everyone that we'll have the questions and answer round after the address by all our keynote speakers. So should you have any questions arising in the middle of any of the address by our guests, please put them on the chat box and we'll take them after our guests have spoken. To begin our session, our first keynote speaker of the day is Dr. Nico Carpentier. Welcome, sir. Nico Carpentier is extraordinary professor at Charles University, Prague, Czech Republic, and president of the International Association for Media and Communication Research for the period of 2020 to 23. He also holds a part-time position at the Free University of Brussels, Belgium, as associate professor. He's a research fellow at Loughborough University. His latest monographs are the discursive material Not Cyprus in Conflict and Community, Media Participation, and Iconoclastic Controversies, a photographic inquiry into antagonistic nationalism. We are very delighted to have you, sir. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we're all eager to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, which was perfectly accurate, I must add, which is rare. So thank you for that as well. Thank you for having me here. As you might imagine, it's a bit earlier in Prague, but I have a lovely cup of coffee with me to keep myself awake through the panel. I'm sure that also the interventions of the other speakers will contribute to me staying awake, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing them. But let me start. I'll share my screen because there are a couple of things I want you to see, and this should be working. When I was invited to speak at the conference that was focused on Pramāna, I must confess, I had to look it up, but I was quite thrilled to see this focus on knowledge production and knowledge tools integrated into the setup of the entire conference in combination with a topic on contemporary media subjects. Because I think that quite a lot of my own work is about, to put it in narcissistic terms, ourselves and how we can function in different ways, not necessarily forgetting about the past, not necessarily annihilating the different communicative traditions that we have developed as researchers, but expanding them, enriching them with different usages of communicative tools, including those arriving and being imported from the arts. And I think that produces us, academic researchers, as media subjects, but media subjects defined in a very broad way. I don't necessarily want to talk about academics writing opinion pieces. I actually want to talk about much more intimate connection between the media, the communication tools, and the knowledge tools that we use. So I think that's where I want to take you. This might be a bit extraordinary. As you might have heard, my title is actually that I am an extraordinary professor at Charles University, and I'm supposed to do extraordinary things. It might sound a bit weird at the same time, and bear with me and let me take you on this trip to arts-based research. Now, let's start with a very obvious, I think, statement. As academics, we love to write. It is one of our core activities. It's one of our main communicative tools, together with these kinds of conversations, either a lecture or conference intervention or public speech. But writing is at the very core of what we do as academics. It's actually part of our academic identity construction. And I think that it has proven to be a vital communication tool in the century-old history of knowledge production. We sometimes separate writing from knowledge production itself, and I think that is actually wrong. I think that the process of writing is integrated and is an integrative part of knowledge production. It's not because we write that we capture our knowledge that already has formed. The process of writing is formative for knowledge production itself. So knowledge communication and knowledge production are actually integrated there, not to be seen as separate. And writing in particular is one of our, and maybe the most vital tool. So whatever I'm going to say should have a big disclaimer. I'm not opposed to writing. I love books. In case you were wondering what this slide was doing here, it is a public statement of my love relationship with writing, and in particular with books. I have nothing against books. My best friends are writers, and I consider myself to be a writer. But the question I want to raise, though, is can we expand that set of tools, communicative tools that we have to communicate academic knowledge? And there have been a whole series of projects that try to do exactly that. I will not have time to go in depth into this discussion, but bear in mind that there's a whole range of projects that have actually been doing this, and that have been doing this for quite a long time. If you're interested, there is an overview of the different fields of moving beyond the written text. You'll find it in an article published in the International Journal of Communication, I think in 2020. And it deals with, for instance, fields of science communication, participatory action research, what is also called multimodal academic communication, which comes from writing studies, of course, visual anthropology and visual sociology, and the topic of my talk, arts-based research. It's at the very bottom of my table, which is one of the many projects that have been developed to move beyond the written text. And I want to focus on arts-based research. What I will do in my talk is give you a brief idea of what arts-based research is about. And then I will give you a set of examples how I have been using it in a variety of ways to communicate academic knowledge, right? So that's the big setup of this talk. Now, arts-based research is part of what we could call the artistic turn in the humanities and in the social sciences. Now, you could tell me, well, we've had so many turns, right? We have the cultural turn, we have the linguistic turn, we have the demotic turn. There's an endless list of turns that have been discussed in our field and in neighboring fields. There are so many turns, one could say, that we all became a bit dizzy and might not always find the perfect direction anymore. But I'm sorry to say, there is also the artistic turn, where scholars, academics working in humanities and social sciences have turned to the arts and started using a series of artistic repertoires to enhance their communicative possibilities. And you'll see on the screen a whole range of publications. Some of them are actually quite old, but I think especially in the past 10, 15 years, we'll see this upsurge of publications that deal with arts-based research, as it's labeled. In particular, I want to point to Patricia Levy's work. You'll see in the middle of the screen, the Method Meets Art book, which I sort of want to use. Now, Levy pushes the argument quite far, possibly too far, in arguing that the arts-based research is a third paradigm next to quantitative and qualitative approaches. I think that might be sort of slightly exaggerated, but it does allow us to emphasize some of the specificities of arts-based research, which are indeed different from qualitative and quantitative paradigms. And sometimes we tend to look at our field as being totally secured by the dimension of quantitative and qualitative research, and we forget that there are also other paradigms, methodological paradigms, which we can also use. And art-based research, according to Levy, is one of them, where in particular, resonance is a key notion, where we learn, where we can actually understand knowledge because it resonates with us. And that brings in an affective dimension. We often see knowledge as rational. What arts-based research is telling us that we can feel knowledge, that knowledge actually has an affective dimension that can also be communicated and that can actually be used in the production of knowledge itself. And that, I think, is a key idea of arts-based research. It uses artistic repertoires not only to communicate knowledge, though, but also to produce it. The actually doing arts is formative for knowledge itself. It allows you, by producing the art, it allows you to expand knowledge itself. And that makes it, I think, also an important toolkit. Now, if you look at Levy's work and the table of contents, we'll see lots of examples there. And if you just look at the chapter structure, you'll find a variety of artistic fields, including fiction-based research, poetic inquiry, music as method, dance, theater, drama, film, which is obviously already close to our field, and the visual arts. And there are many, many other possibilities there. And sometimes when I talk to PhD students about this, I raise the very basic question, can you dance your PhD? Because that is basically what arts-based research is answering. And that's a very simple and full, yes, you can. Maybe not everybody should try. Our bodies might have limitations and we should not break something in trying to communicate our PhDs or other research. There are limits. But intellectually and ontologically, and epistemologically, this is perfectly possible. And by doing so, we might actually expand our idea about what is knowledge, and we might produce a different kind of knowledge that enriches our work, our research. And that's the point that Levy and all the other colleagues of arts-based research try to make. And to give you one example, talking about PhD research, it's sort of a famous example. It's a comic book by Nick Susanis called Unflattening, and it's a PhD. This is one of the, I think, the nice examples where the concept of and the format, the genre of the comic strip is used to engage in a philosophical debate. And I think that also has been acknowledged as a PhD project at Columbia University. Now, the big question, why would we do this? Why risk breaking your leg, dancing your PhD, if you want to have it in other terms? Why? There are a couple of reasons. I think that if we talk about knowledge generation, we still have this myth of us sitting quietly in front of a computer screen, thinking deeply. And we do not include the practice of writing even in knowledge production, but we can expand that. We can, by doing other things, such as more artistic work, we can also produce knowledge. It is a very precious tool to engage in knowledge generation and knowledge production. By producing art, it forces us to rethink some of the theoretical frameworks, even some of the empirical data that come out of our analysis. It enriches our capacity to produce knowledge. And it's not very well known in community and media studies, although a number of people have been using it also in our field. It is still, I think, extremely promising as a tool for knowledge generation. It allows us to expand the base of knowledge itself. And that my reference to resonance was quite important here. We still think about knowledge in very rationalist terms, and I think that being able to feel knowledge is quite an interesting experiment, and actually, I think, also intellectually extremely precious. Knowledge is not purely rational. Knowledge is also something that you can feel. Another reason why art-based research is highly promising, because it creates more hybrid subject positions. This does not mean that we all have to become artists. Again, that is not the point. The point is that we can choose for more hybrid subject positions, hybrid identities, combining the subject position of the academic with, for instance, the subject position of the artist, or possibly even, and I call that the AAA identity model, with the identity of the activist. These are complicated reconfigurations, not always easy, but they, in their complexity, also allow us to enrich not just our work, our knowledge production, but also our identities. And Sinner talks about artademics. It's not a perfect word. It's actually, I think, quite an ugly term, but it sort of captures the idea of this hybridization of identities. It allows us to engage in respectful dialogues with other fields, the field of the arts. And of course, that dialogue should be respectful. We should not instrumentalize the arts. We should not just use them as a set of tools. We should engage in a dialogue with that other field and respect the logics of that other field in a very Bourdieuian way. But that dialogue is stimulating and enriching in its own right. And finally, it allows us to reach diversified audiences. We move beyond the written text, and that also means that we can reach different publics. Now, is this an easy thing? Are there no problems? Well, of course there are. Wouldn't be an academic lecture if I wouldn't point to some problems, right? Expanding knowledge, great. Feeling knowledge, brilliant. But the appreciation for the effective dimensions of knowledge is still limited. And sometimes it sounds strange to colleague academics to argue that knowledge is also a felt experience. And the appreciation for that, because we are very much working in a rationalist model of knowledge production, is quite limited. And it requires some convincing, I think. Still, hybridity of subject positions. Again, it sounds great, but it produces a whole set of what in traditional sociology would be called role conflicts. Because that hybridization of, for instance, the artistic and the academic subject position are not perfectly compatible, and they require particular choices to be made, not to become either a full academic instrumentalizing the arts, or to become a full artist, forgetting about academic procedure, for instance. It also requires this hybridization. It requires a set of particular skills in which we not always have been trained. Being an artist requires access to a toolkit that we may not have. We can acquire that, but that, of course, requires an extra effort. The respectful dialogue is also problematized by the idea that sometimes we academics still have, where we see ourselves as the ultimate center of knowledge production, and where we refuse to acknowledge that others also have that capacity. So there is a competitive dimension in there, which is quite often not spoken about, but I think we need to talk about this empire of academia myth, where we define ourselves at the very center of knowledge production, which I think is discrediting and devalidating quite a number of other knowledge production centers in our societies. And of course, engaging in that dialogue with other fields, contextualized by this myth of the empire of academia, also produces problems in the acceptance, which might also be whether it's considered for promotion in academic CVs, etc. Also there we do see problems. And finally, it's great to say that we will reach a diversified audience, but if we want to talk about the art, maybe we should keep our good old Bourdieu and la distinction, right? The distinction in mind, knowing that, of course, the arts are, and the high arts are not necessarily the most accessible fields of society either. They also have their exclusions. They also have their codes, which require particular sets of knowledges, which exclude different groups in society from engaging with them. And that should not be forgotten. We should not see this arts-based research project as the ultimate solution to all the communicative problems we have and all the differences that characterize our societies, also when it comes to acquiring knowledge, to learning. Now, let me wrap up with some very short examples, and this is the how it all began slide. How did I get involved into this? It's a very simple and straightforward story. In a sense, I was working in Cyprus. I was writing this book about community media and conflict transformation, and I was writing a book, and the book was about participation. It was about community media. And I realized at the very end of that process that I had to do something with the book once the book was finished. And it raised a very simple question: what shall I do with this book? And of course, what academics will always do, and the obvious answer to that question is, well, you talk about the book, you do lectures, and you bore everybody to death talking about your own book. That's what we do, and obviously that's what I did. But I also thought that because this was such a project focused on participation, focused on community media, I wanted to organize a different model for communication, for talking about the book, and for expanding the ideas in the book. So I actually contacted a number of the people that I was researching, community media organizations in Cyprus, and I invited them to collaborate together with an arts center, NIM, in Cyprus, in the construction of an exhibition, actually a series of exhibitions that addressed the topics of the book through a series of art projects organized by community media producers and other democratic activists on the island. And that became Respublica. You'll find the catalog online. It's open access. It's a gorgeous book in its layouting, because I had some really wonderful people doing that work for me. But the entire idea was that I could act as a curator, not just as a writer, to produce a whole range of activities that would address the topics that I had been researching, and that would not only communicate these issues, but also enrich them. Respublica had a whole range of exhibitions, including a Juten Wachter exhibition, including the Participation Matters, with 18 art projects integrated into that, and many, many other activities. It's virtually killed me because it was a very intense project, but it allowed me to move beyond the written text, beyond that particular book on the discursive material, not as it was called. It also allowed me to start experimenting with installation art. This is the Mirror Palace of Democracy, which was part of Respublica. And it was a mirror palace. It was a moment where you could experience, by entering the Mirror Palace, the installation, you could experience the contingency of democracy itself. If you have questions, I'll be happy to talk about it. There's not that much time. But it was, for me, also a very important moment where I could use installation art with a whole range of videos to rethink also my theoretical position on the construction and the contingency of democracy. A second example is a book that was mentioned in the introduction. It is dealing with antagonistic nationalism in Cyprus. where I got fascinated by the memorials and started to work on combining the toolkits of photography and exhibition to communicate my analysis on how memorials were implicated in the construction of nationalism itself. And I, again, will not go into detail. I'll just show you one of the recent photographs about, this is a memorial about one of the mass graves in Cyprus, which of course is about commemorating victims of a massacre, but it is also in its entire configuration pointing to the other as enemy. And so it engages implicitly in a construction of self and enemy in a way that I think is still problematic. My third example, and it's my last one because my time is virtually up, is a project called Silencing Unsilencing Nature. This is driven by the idea that, and I'll show you the next slide, that in many different ways we have been silencing nature and we've been silencing animals. We've been doing that through the use of symbolic violence, and some of the fairy tales that have by now circulated globally, but also some of the other narratives. We've actually created a hierarchy between us humans and the animal world. In some cases, the silencing is to be taken literally. The stone you see on the screen, it has vluk on it, which is the Czech word for wolf. This is actually the place where in the Czech Republic, the last wolf was killed in 1914 in the mountains in what is now the Czech Republic, which used to be Czechoslovakia at that time. We silenced nature, and I was deeply interested in unsilencing nature, in finding ways of talking about nature, but also representing nature in more respectful ways. And that became the Silencing Unsilencing Nature project, where we started using artistic photographic interventions to give animals more of a voice and to talk in more respectful terms about animals. This was in collaboration with Verkfabriken, a Swedish art center, and I'm going to skip a few things, resulting in a whole set of different projects, but also resulting in the Wolf Talks arts-based research project, which has been an exhibition running in Prague, first in the city itself, but now in a gallery, and that exhibition is opening on Monday. And if I have some vague notion of stress written all over my face, that's because that exhibition is opening in a few days, allowing the use of photography, but also sound art to give nature more of a respectful and empathic voice, using photography, as I said, and collage techniques to problematize the position of the wolf in European societies, but also to then return a voice to them. In case you're interested, you can listen to these wolves speaking to you. They're very clever wolves. They actually know their Foucault and their Derrida very well. Actually, they know them maybe better than most of us, and they explain them in the most marvelous way, talking back to us humans. So if you go to that website, you can select the wolf and you can actually listen to a short lecture from one of these wolves explaining how they have been silenced and how they wish to be unsilenced. Now, let me wrap up in 3 seconds. A lot of the work that I've been talking about has been captured in a special issue. So in case you don't want to listen to my last words, you can have a look at that special issue of Comunicazioni Sociali, an Italian journal. But there are 2 main ideas, what I want to conclude. Yes, with these projects, we can, like Wolf Talks, we can strengthen counter-hegemonic discourses, disrupting the silencing of nature, disrupting ideologies of speciesism. But through using, more fundamentally, through using arts-based research, which is more than artistic research, right? Because it stays connected to our academic enterprise, we can actually become part of a variety of media ecologies. We can move beyond the written text, and we can expand knowledge production and knowledge communication. And I thank you for listening to me, and I'll be happy to give the floor back to the chair.
Thank you so much, sir. This has been enlightening, to say the least. We've always been restricted in the traditional sense by, reading. The text has been our major source of information and the medium for producing text. But this is, for a young researcher like me, for a novice like me, getting into the whole space of arts-based research is definitely enlightening and expanding my way of looking at things. And I'm sure a lot of our attendees also would feel the same. So thank you so much, and we wish you all the best for your upcoming exhibition. Up next for our keynote speaker, the second keynote speaker for the day, we have with us Mr. Apar Gupta. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Apar Gupta is a lawyer and the executive director at the Internet Freedom Foundation, which is an Indian digital liberties organization that seeks to ensure that technology respects fundamental rights. A postgraduate in law from the Columbia University of Law, Mr. Gupta has worked as a commercial litigator in top law firms such as Karanjawala and Company, and was also a partner at Advani and Company. He continues to write op-eds and journal articles for Indian Express, The Hindu, IIC Quarterly, and Seminar, etc. And also written a book on the IT Act of 2000, published by LexisNexis. Since 2015, Apar Gupta has been working extensively on public interest issues, which include strategic litigation and organization of campaigns and collectives. In court, his work as a lawyer includes key digital rights cases on privacy and censorship. He's also a part of key constitutional challenges on Section 66A, the right to privacy, and Aadhaar representing public interest litigants. Beyond court work, Mr. Gupta has worked extensively with activists and set up digital campaigns such as those on net neutrality and fight against defamation laws and safeguard privacy. Thank you so much for joining us, sir, today. We're glad to have you here and also eager to hear from you. Over to you.
Your mic is on mute, Mr. Apar.
I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, we can hear you.
So thank you so much, Jui, for that really indulgent introduction. And I'm so happy that my camera quality is poor, so you can't see the blushes. I'm much more of a person who's been invited here from the legal domain, though I have a great degree of appreciation for the work which is done by so many people who bring an interdisciplinary focus towards media studies. I think that media studies have become more important given the kind of society that we're living in, and which is what I'll be touching upon today, which is a much more digitized adoption, which has been driven towards, which is changing human facility interaction between themselves as well as with systems, processes, government institutions, private sector, in all ranges of our life, personal, professional, interpersonal, everywhere. Technology is the great intermediator, which is quite often making sure that the connections that we are forging quite often have certain preconditioned values within them, and it's redistributing power. And here I would like to re-emphasize that how do we think about technology adoption a little, okay? To throw this a little broader, what should be a coherent framework for any kind of scholar in India or any kind of person looking at it, whether they're approaching that work from the lens of, let's say, legal studies, public policy, economics, etc., etc. It is towards serving what we have agreed as a consensus amongst us as the very objective of why our republic has been found. And this is textually prescribed in the Constitution of India. I think there can be little quarrel with that. And I bring this up because also we are living in a society which does have diversity, but also has division within it. And this division quite often is leading to a level of polarization. However, there is a great degree of consensus which is even existing in India today and will continue to exist around the Constitution of India. And the Constitution of India sets out this consensus for our republic in the preambular values, which guides our work and should also guide technology adoption. And these preambular values are what guides my work at the Internet Freedom Foundation. So which this small preface, I wouldn't say a caveat, but a small preface, I hope that brings together a better degree of understanding of digitization, internet, and also what are the certain governance processes which sometimes put a question on rights and how it should be understood. So the first thing I would like to just mention here is that in India, not everyone has access to the internet. And this level of disparity is not there in small pockets, but it is much more widespread than what we perceive when you step outside cities and towns towards much more rural districts. For instance, as of 2019, which is the last available data we had, out of the 5,97,618 inhabited villages, 5,69,897 are covered by mobile services. So the underlying infrastructure for internet availability itself is quite often absent. I'm not talking about the inability of people who may be residents, who may have the economic or the social facility towards purchasing, let's say, a smartphone or subscribing to a 4G connection. What I'm saying is a little much more fundamental. In an age of abundance of information, in India today, even today, they're close to about 24,000 villages which don't have internet access due to the absence of the underlying infrastructure. Furthermore, there are about 150,029 gram panchayats which have been connected by the BharatNet project, out of which 136,693 have been made service ready. So even the programs which are ongoing right now are not fulfilling their mission objectives. And this is all as per data which is being published by the government. And I would like to also re-emphasize the degree of disparity which is existing in access towards the internet. And this becomes very foundational, so what I'll say later. But the degree of access, if you look at in a city in Delhi, there are more internet connections than people. And this is not an anecdotal reference by me. If you look at the TRAI connectivity reports, you will notice that there are 110 or 124 connections for 100 people. But at the same point in time, in a city such as Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Pune, etc., 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 you notice that this level of connectivity sometimes is concentrated with people who have economic facility as well as a degree of social mobility present or educational qualifications. It in fact progressively decreases and regresses in certain situations which are first tied with respect to their economic inability to afford a smartphone, where the average price for the lowest smartphone is equal to a month's wage for a person. And this is again as per a documented study. So just imagine a person out of the 12 months is making sure maybe one of the household help, a driver, etc., purchasing a smartphone, which is truly functional and then has access to Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., etc. There are cheaper versions also available, but when you bundle in the data costs, the charger, the smartphone, and the regular update cycles and the need to change them over a period of time, each family member in a lower income group will not have the facility of an independent smartphone. So this level of inequality of access is existing in India and becomes very important to consider. One more thing I'd like to say, though trends are pointing towards an increasing adoption due to the low price of data in India, as well as the decreasing cost of smartphones. Yet there are certain pre-existing social values which are present in this inequality. For instance, the gender divide. And this has been most recently captured by the National Family Health Survey, which has been analyzed by the journalistic portal India Spend. Their report indicates that in 8 states and 2 union territories, such as Bihar, Andhra Pradesh, Tripura, West Bengal, Telangana, Assam, Gujarat, Meghalaya, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Karnataka, Daman and Diu, less than 40% women have used the internet. And when you look at that figure comparatively, in the same states, more than 40% men have used the internet. In only 3 states and 1 union territory, did more than 50% from the rural areas acknowledge they have used the internet, which is Goa, Kerala, Sikkim, and Ladakh. And the basis of this quantification and this data essentially is towards use of the internet once, not regularly. So a large number of people in India who may be either in gender communities, caste groups, social groups, do not have access to the internet. And this becomes very important. And I would also like to state, this is an issue on which the private sector, the government, as well as civil society, academics and experts and institutions are all aligned. We all agree that there is a need for cheaper, faster, and universal internet. However, this argument also has a flip side. And that's where I think there is a level of disagreement present. For instance, if there is connectivity which is provided in terms of infrastructure, as well as individual ability to receive high-speed internet, then in those situations, is it proper and under what conditions? Firstly, is it proper to shut down the internet? And secondly, in what conditions should it be done? Given that it results in large amounts of disability with respect to daily function for people. It leads to economic losses, and it is a direct infringement of civil and political rights for people, including the freedom of speech and expression and that of assembly. And if it is done also, shouldn't it be done proportionally? So there is ongoing concerns with respect to internet shutdowns in India, which are quite often imposed due to justifications of state security and prevention of disinformation. But for people like me, it is always a disproportionate response because it is turning off the entire tap of water to ensure that certain contaminated water does not reach a particular locality. So imagine turning it off into an entire district. So it's being disproportionate by itself. And I think technology, as well as administrative and regulatory functions, do provide a degree of facility where individual restrictions can be placed, which are much more immediate and proximate to the justification of state security, law and order, or prevention of disinformation, such as individual site blocking, which may be done with reasons which are published why the site is blocked, for what duration it is blocked, and it also has safeguards where it will be reviewed at a certain point in time. And it is to our distress that despite a large level of consensus that more people need access to the internet, more government services need to be made available through it, and the private sector needs to digitize to bring a greater level of efficiency to its work. The internet still can be snapped off, for instance, in the state of Rajasthan, for the justification that there is a state exam being conducted for recruitment of certain police officials. And this is, while amusing, very distressing because it's also been done in Bihar, and India ranks as the #1 country. Now imagine in a state such as Rajasthan, which relies on a huge amount of revenue from tourism coming out of the second COVID wave. A tourist cannot swipe a card at an ATM machine. This is or cannot do a digital transaction through UPI. So while people may not agree with my arguments, for instance, of assembly, transparency, public accountability in situations where internet is shut down, let's say in Haryana, or more recently in Uttar Pradesh, at the very instance, reform is necessary. And I hope larger agreement can be reached here. However, will it be done? And here I think it becomes very important for our institutions, which includes the judiciary, parliament, to all look at this issue from the perspective of constitutionalism. So the basis of technology in terms of its universalization, as well as its restriction, has a very good basis in our preambular values. Now, I will touch upon a much more recent instance for about the rest of my time, which also shows a growing chasm in terms of how the government approaches regulation and what is actually needed. And at the same point in time, why are large frameworks which constitute the digital media ecology, which are essentially social media, essentially are posing a great threat to individuals as well as social values, not only in India, but in abroad. So let me first start with a problem statement. What is the problem with, let's say, an online social media platform? And here, even though people may look at the manifestations, which are disinformation, abuse and online violence, I would say it is the underlying economic model which drives this digital engine, which is what has been identified by many authors to be run on the basis of serving contextual advertisements on the basis of gathering personal data. So you can look at the engineering choices, for instance. Go to Twitter, for instance, which is a smaller platform, but also go to Facebook or go to Instagram. What do you notice? You have a news feed in which you are being served information which is being either user-generated or is by an advertiser, both punched next to each other. But there's a very interesting engineering choice which you notice, which are two. One, the information which is being shown to you is prioritized on the basis of your surfing history on that platform or even beyond it, because cookies now enable these social media companies to place a resident cookie in your browser or even connect on another website. For instance, if it is enabling a comment feature through a Facebook login, where it knows where do you go, what do you watch, how long do you watch. For instance, Google, when it provides free fonts through its font family, also has something called pixel tracking, where it can even know how long you are reading which line, and if you're moving your cursor there and selecting it, which we subconsciously do sometimes when we read online text, right? Instagram, for instance, can even get to know when you're clicking on photographs and what's the delay interval. And over a period of time, this level of information gives a very deep degree of insight into an individual's behavior. But how does this become noxious? Information, of course, empowers the platform. But what does it do with it? It serves as contextual advertisements. But why does it pose a problem? It poses a problem because we as people like to see content and we engage with it quite often when it is much more engaging. So media may not serve the values of factfulness, accuracy, verification, right? Or shared social, factual, contextual, principle-based understanding. The earth is not flat. But if you do engage with certain types of content, for instance, which are delving with, let's say, some kind of conspiracy theory or what people call as alternative facts, you will be bombarded with more and more information on social media platforms, which will show you that the earth is indeed flat. And it will reconfirm your bias, and you will also have a community of people. And given that there's an abundance of information, there will be sometimes certain papers quoted without context. And we've seen a lot of this happen also around vaccination, for instance, which is also evolving, and there's greater public understanding around those risks. But it has also, those risks sometimes have been amplified to an extent to direct criticism against the process of vaccination itself. And this is what makes social media really, really troubling. The second thing I would like to say, the underlying economics pose, is that it wants you to spend more and more time there. Because the more time you're there in front of the screen, the more ads you see, the more purchases you make, and the more information you again part away back to that platform. And this is why you see certain technical features, such as the infinite scroll, which a lot of Gen Z and millennials call as doom scrolling. And I would like to ask people here, sometimes you on your smartphone at the end of a very tough work day, just notice yourself putting your finger like this and doing this for 5 or 10 minutes. And even if you accidentally look at the start time and the end time, there's almost a sense of a trance. You do not know where those 15 minutes went, right? So we called it mindless. We call it mind-numbing. But what is the reason behind this? The reason behind this is that all these engineering choices to make the infinite scroll, to place that content there, have been made by the best minds of our generation, by PhDs from Stanford, and has been then made towards serving the contextual ads which can be served towards you. And a lot of advertisement is also done for political purposes. A lot of these issues have been highlighted in a recent whistleblower complaint or complaints, which are multiple complaints made by Frances Haugen, who is an employee who was a former product engineer at Facebook. And her individual complaints cites towards internal correspondence and research by Facebook itself, which indicates that it is leading to all kinds of harm. The first complaint is about the 2020 election and the Jan 6 insurrection in the United States. The second one is with respect to Facebook's removal of hate speech and misleading about its transparency reports, which says that it reduces hate speech by over 90% by identifying it through automated intelligence. And the internal research actually shows, and I quote here, we are deleting less than 5% of all hate speech posted to Facebook. This is actually an optimistic estimate, end of quote. It leads to impacts on teen and mental health, where 13.5% of teen girls on Instagram say that the platform makes them think about thoughts of suicide and self-injury. It leads to 17% of teen girls users saying that the platform makes eating issues worse. And Facebook's own internal research shows that we make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. I'll stop here with just one more quote from there, which is with respect to another individual complaint made with respect to how Facebook acts with respect to removal of speech, with respect to its content moderation, where the internal research says, noticing how Facebook acts whenever a complaint is made to remove any kind of speech on its platform. Start quote, Facebook's decision-making on content policies routinely by political considerations, end of quote. And you can look back at the Wall Street Journal reporting of Newly Purnell, which also showed the same thing, that there's a high degree of political interference. Now, what does this mean? There's a large amount of social injury, social instability, individual injury being caused by social media platforms. Yet at the same point in time, they provide incredible facility. Let's be honest. Without WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook, not only we would have an abundance of time, our life would become much tougher. WhatsApp actually facilitates business and connection for so many people. Through Facebook, people do find spaces to stay through certain groups. They market their businesses, they raise advocacy, people share their research. There is actual facility and use. So we have to identify these individual harms, make a regulatory structure, go with a principle-based approach flowing from the constitutional framework. But is it being done? On February 25th, 2021, the union government made what were called as the IT Rules 2021, which also included certain rules for digital ethics. It regulated 3 principal entities with respect to their function. The first are social media platforms. The second are OTT streaming services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and the third are online news portals like Quint, Wire, News Laundry, etc., etc., etc. Now, this regulation by itself has been challenged in 18 petitions in different high courts, and there are 3 significant orders with respect to them. The first challenge in the order in the Live Law Media versus Union of India case, which is before the Kerala High Court, resulted in a stay of the rules against Live Law for its enforcement. The second order from the Bombay High Court in fact, stays the rules completely with respect to the enforcement on digital news platforms. And the third, much more recent order, in the case of Carnatic singer, playwright, and author T.M. Krishna, has actually re-emphasized the necessity for that stay against these rules, because it's the reasoning that they undermine our fundamental rights to freedom of speech and expression. Now, you may say that, Apar, these court findings are only with respect to media entities. What is with respect to social media users? Well, with respect to social media users, I don't have the time, but those provisions are problematic and do also lead to undermining of freedom of speech and expression as well as privacy. And there have been comments made by the Madras High Court with respect to this. I'll just read it out one para very, very quickly. There is substantial basis to the petitioner's assertion that Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution may be infringed and how the rules may be coercively applied to intermediaries. Intermediaries are basically social media companies, such as Facebook, Instagram, etc., or Twitter. Paragraph 13, though the petitions have not been brought by hosts of website platforms, but by social media platforms on the website are used by one and sundry, and there is a genuine apprehension as to the petitioner's suggestion that a wink or a nod from appropriate quarters may result in the platform being inaccessible to a citizen. Accordingly, if any action is taken in terms of so-and-so, it will be subject to the outcome of this petition. Now, what makes it clear from this is that there is a large level of problems with respect to social media and the media ecology today. We are surrounded by it perpetually. There's no escape from it, right? Firstly, people who need access to it are not getting access, and we need to work much more towards it. That will help democratizing media also, because when these people are part of these communities, for instance, if more women are online, spaces will be safer, and there's enough research to demonstrate that. 2, when access is provided to people, it is still troubling, because the underlying economic engine which drives social media relies on surveillance, and the engineering choices which are made result in social harms as well as individual injury. 3rd, the government regulation around this quite often is towards appropriating power over these platforms, where not the media, but the medium itself is the message, right? So the government wants to control the platforms. And finally, where is the answer for all of this? At least in terms of principle, at least in terms of consensus. I'll end with what I started. It is there in our preambular values of justice, equality, liberty, and fraternity. Thank you so much for this generous offer to come here, address all of you. And I wish you the very best for this conference. I'll turn this back to Julie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Apar. I mean, to sum up with what you've been saying, this entire half an hour that you've been addressing us brings to light so many disparities that we often fail to notice as one of the privileged sections of the society. And especially, coming up with an age where all of us are constantly on social media platforms or surrounded by digital media, our consumption becomes all, we're more aware now, at least after this session, that what is happening and the experiences that we experience have repercussions and consequences. But the question still remains, like you said, how do we navigate those, right? Where is the beginning of finding a solution that works, which has more, benefits than the disadvantages that come up with? I hope you stay with us till the end of the session. I'm sure a lot of students, a lot of attendees will have questions. And I'd like to remind all the guests, all the attendees here that the chat is still open for questions. Should you have any questions, please put them up on chat and we'll take them up after all our guests have spoken.
I have a small request.
No.
I would have ordinarily stayed back, but today I have a meeting with certain High Court judges. We are actually making rules for privacy protections in all courts. So I'm part of a working group there. It's there on Saturday. And I know there may be some questions, but I would like to invite them. We have a forum. I'm just typing that in the chat box here, which you can also share, which is there for all the staff. It's forum@internetfreedom.in. And I'm always available. I work in a non-profit which is publicly centered. So please reach out to me, drop me an email. We are more than happy to chat, engage, and all of our staff is public facing. Okay, so thank you so much, Jui, but please take this apology for me in my inability to continue further here.
Thank you so much, Apar. I mean, we're really glad you took the time out from your busy schedule to address us. I'm sure a lot of our curious students would reach out to you eventually. All the best. Moving ahead for our final session for our spotlight, we have Ms. Preeti Raghunath with us. Dr. Preeti Raghunath is an assistant professor at Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication and also an incoming lecturer at Monash University, Malaysia campus. Her research portfolio is shaped by her multidisciplinary interests that lie at the intersections of global media studies, media policy studies, ethnographic methods, and South Asian studies. She serves as a country expert for India on a multi-country research project funded by the European Research Council. Currently, she also serves as the vice chair of the Global Media Policy Working Group of the International Association for Media and Communication Research. She's been a recipient of grants and awards for her research endeavors. And before entering academia, she was a reporter and communications professional, working across print, broadcast, and corporate communication spaces. She likes to travel and do her research that reflects slice of life realities while tying them to policy studies. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Preeti, today. We're glad to have you here. Could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, am I audible now?
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Juhi, thank you so much for that warm welcome. Firstly, I'd like to place my gratitude on record to Dr. Sriram Gopalakrishnan and Dr. Baiduria for inviting me for this conference. It's indeed a pleasure to be addressing people and at a conference that is organized by people in the same Symbiosis fraternity. So thank you so much for that. My regards to Professor Nico Carpentier and Apar Gupta, both of whose work, a very inspiring work I follow. Thank you so much to all the attendees for being here. So let me just share my screen and can you see the presentation? Is it?
It is visible, yes.
Okay. Okay. So my topic for the day is datafication and policy making, understanding deliberative democracy. So before I begin, I'd like to give you a sense of a little bit of the kind of work that I've been doing over the past few years. And much of the work has been in the realm of media policy making and tying it to the larger ambit and umbrella of this growing field in largely political science, but with multidisciplinary undertones called deliberative democracy studies, where one engages with deliberative democracy theories, drawing on traditional democracy theories, but to bring in the dialogic and the communicative element of democracy building to such studies. The contours of my talk today are as follows. I mean, some initial comments on the necessity and the need for a topic like this. I mean, why I even got interested in studying this phenomenon called datafication is in order. Data-led practices themselves are not new. I mean, through history and through time, we've had practices of enumeration for starters, which have served kingdoms and colonizing powers to contribute to their activities in reaching out to various kinds of populations. We've had the segregation of population based on bodily markers through much of history. A tax collection and a bunch of other economic activities are premised on the collection of data. So data-led practices and data-centric practices are really not new. Having said that, what we're really witnessing today is a new form of new addition or a new trajectory that this ambit of data-led practices are taking, which is datafication in the current form. It is led by digitization of a bunch of life processes and practices in a big way, something that we are possibly witnessing for the first time. The extent of digitization and the extent of datafication is perhaps a new phenomenon for all of us. And this has happened over the past few years. I mean, as we are speaking, we are having conversations in the country today on the digital health ID by the Ayushman Bharat mission of the government of India, which is well premised on exclusion. And I will arrive at why I say that. rather than inclusion, much like a bunch of other practices that have been brought to the fore in recent years. And therefore, it becomes very opportune for us to examine this process and this practice of datafication and the policy making around it through three different facets that I would like to address today. I will dip into three different baskets. The first is policy making for data, where I will very briefly touch upon personal and non-personal data. I will then move on to look at cities and datafication, and very briefly again touch upon some of the practices that are contributing to what I call, or what I would like to call, the building of the data city, and problematize that, of course. And thirdly, I'd like to look at the international and the transnational realm, where we are talking about sovereignty and data governance, and how these conversations are happening in international fora, where India as a country, as a nation, as a modern Westphalian nation state, is engaging with other countries and in international trade fora, for instance. So the idea is to tie these three baskets together and indulge in some larger theoretical rumination from deliberative democracy studies to ask some fundamental questions of where we are headed. I don't promise any answers, but this is to sort of get the ball rolling and get us to think about certain ideas of what digitization means. Digitization can be a very potent tool for the good, but which direction are we really taking? Much like what Apar had just raised. This is just to sort of set the stage for what deliberative democracy studies is. Some of you who are tuned into the theoretical aspects of, people like Habermas, who drew on the idea of communicative action and the ideal speech condition. Much of his work has been critiqued by people like Nancy Fraser and a bunch of others who talk about counter public spheres. But these are some fundamental ideas that contribute to this communicative dimension of democracy theorizing, and that's why I raise this. It is also premised on the Rawlsian conception of justice. And so these are two densely theoretical strands from political philosophy that inform my work. Now, very specifically, deliberative democracy theorizing has been, much of it has been taking place from Australia, with some more work happening in Europe. And one of the key scholars in this realm is John Dryzek, who wrote about the deliberative turn in the theorizing of democracy, which started taking place in the early 1990s. People like Bowman talk about epistemic pluralism, and I think this is opportune for this conference, which is premised on Pramāna, which again I'll touch upon later. But just the epistemic value of something like deliberation and argumentation, which is so central to democracy building, and the need for pluralism in such a space is outlined by Bowman. Elster, for instance, takes a generational approach, which is not linear in time. It doesn't move from a set of years to another set of years, but a generational approach in the theorizing of democracy itself. Mansbridge, again, draws on what is called a systemic turn. And all of this is to just let you know that there is a lot of eclectic theorizing that goes into deliberative democracy studies. And the key aspect for my talk, which is of great use, is looking at deliberation itself as an epistemology. And this has been spoken again by Mansbridge, who talks about, and some others, who talk about deliberative democracy or deliberation as a talk-based approach, which is premised on civility. And I would like to underline the word civility there, much of which is really about argumentative traditions, deliberative dimensions of speaking up and reaching out to opponents, placing ideas and indulging in dialogic forms of knowledge generation. Now, let me look at the three baskets that I was hinting at in the beginning of my presentation. The first is the realm of the personal data protection in India, where policy making for it had begun way back in 2018. The government of India, led by Justice Sri Krishna Committee, had put out a policy document in the public realm and had invited stakeholders, including the public, to comment on the document and invited feedback on the many clauses that went into this particular document that was then introduced as a bill in the Lok Sabha in 2019. Now, in the between these two iterations of the document, we saw public engagement. The legal fraternity had engaged in a big way, including the IFF and a bunch of other think tanks and legal houses. And all of them had made a number of suggestions for making the bill itself more democratic. But as it was introduced in the Lok Sabha, the second iteration saw a turn towards securing the state, protecting the state. I mean, the data protection was interpreted as protecting the interests of the state instead of the citizen or the individual in question, with the contents of the PDP bill coming under heavy criticism for flaying privacy concerns in favor of national interests. So this is one thing that I'd like to flag off. The second instance is, of course, in the realm of non-personal data. Now, when we talk about personal data, one is familiar with debates on privacy, for instance, and one draws on the GDPR of Europe. But when it comes to non-personal data, India is perhaps the first country in the world to have policy making around non-personal data. And what is non-personal data? Non-personal data operates on a negative definition, which means that the document itself talks about how any data that is not personal data is non-personal data. In other words, anonymized data, pseudonymized data, data that cannot be traced back to the individual, but is part of larger data sets. I mean, the various attributes of your behavior online and offline is gathered, and anything that contributes to understanding these larger patterns without going back and tracing it back to the individual is called non-personal data. Again, the process for this is that the MeitY had constituted a committee of experts in 2019 to deliberate and devise a framework for governing non-personal data. The initial report was released for public consultation in July 2020, much in the middle of the pandemic. And therefore, this entire shift, in engaging with the public took a digital turn. And I'll come to that a little later. And on the basis of over 1,500 representations and submissions from various industry bodies, companies, civil society, and independent experts, the committee released a revised report earlier this year, which modified the previous framework and addressed several issues raised by all of these people with respect to the initial report. Now, the second iteration was put out for public comments by January end, and it has since gone back. And we're yet to hear on various processes that go into this. Now, I'm just flagging off the policy making for these two realms of data, personal and non-personal data, to give you a sense of how the state engages in policy making. And I'll make some pointed comments on that towards the end. And here I'd like to maybe in a somewhat of a self-indulgent tone, talk a little bit about my work in the non-personal data realm, where I've been carrying out a digital ethnography, or I did in 2020 and early 2021, when this process of putting it out for public comments, etc., was happening. There is a Telegram group called Pramāna, which has been constituted by HasGeek. It really started off when Aadhaar had come into the picture, and they've had a lot of experience in sort of advocating for citizen rights and privacy. And I've been part of this group where we've engaged extensively with, what the non-personal data, that policy making for it means, what the clauses mean, what are the practices looking like, etc., and what are the dangers of something like, the overstretching of the state in this realm, etc. There's another signal group called Cyber Universe, where announcements and invitations are often put together. And I have participated in a number of webinars, constantly engaging with policy actors to understand this realm better and to understand the larger rhetoric and the discourse around various aspects of non-personal data. And the changes that have been brought about in these two iterations of policy making for non-personal data, including all of these elements, the details of which I won't get into because I'm not focusing so much on the policy and the legal aspects, but to make some larger theoretical points. And therefore, this digital ethnography really gave me a sense of how policy making has taken a turn and what it means for, democracy in general. The second basket that I want to dip into is, of course, the smart city. And over the last few years, we've seen the smart city mission taking it on in a very pressing mode. I mean, the Highway Development Authority, for instance, has FASTags, which records your, I mean, of course, it's for economic purposes, but it does serve as a point of, as a point of collection of data on the citizen in a big way. And I mean, your travel is recorded, etc. The Hyderabad airport, for instance, has the facial recognition software, which has again come under a lot of criticism. So all of this point to the emergence, and I mean, there's a lot of growing conversation on urbanization and its digitization. It's not only, I mean, earlier the conversation was around migration and urbanization and the making of the city, but now increasingly it's on digitization of urbanization. And this is, of course, the premise to understand the smart city and the growing focus on the digital urban. But I would like to draw your attention to what is called the India Urban Data Exchange, the IUDX. And this is something I really wanted to follow in 2020 when I set out, when I actually began my work at Symbiosis and I shifted to Pune. And Pune is really the first smart city to engage in something called the Pune Urban Data Exchange in late 2019 as under the umbrella of the IUDX. What really happens here is they sort of trade huge data sets of various aspects of our lives as citizens, and they use these data sets to perhaps improve traffic or improve or engage with traffic patterns, understanding citizen behavior, working with startups or the corporate space, especially the startups, to engage in innovation and growth. So these are all the buzzwords that go with this urban data exchange that, under the umbrella of the IUDX. Now, this is a space where they are really operationalizing non-personal data, but this connection has never been made explicit. And the ramifications of this have not been delved into. Even before we had something delineated as non-personal data, we had the government getting into this mode of operationalizing non-personal data for its economic activity under the buzzwords of innovation and growth. So all of this point towards this growing of understanding of what I have now, begun to grapple with, which is the infrastructural turn. And we talk about this in media studies as well, especially over the last 4-5 years. We are really experiencing this infrastructural turn in terms of increasing number of research and literature and scholarly work on looking at not just the material aspects of infrastructure and the technologies of infrastructure, but also, an STS sort of infused way of understanding how actors and networks, of course, shape infrastructure. But going beyond that, can we even look at deliberation, which is sometimes an immaterial or a non-material kind of an aspect of our lives, which really dominates knowledge making in a big way? Can we look at the immaterial aspects of this infrastructural turn? And in conceptualizing this, I've been thinking about the idea of the data city, where we have the making of the data city in a big way without deliberative participation of the citizens who inhabit or would like to inhabit the data city. The third kind of basket that I want to dip into is looking at India and how it works in the international or the transnational intergovernmental spaces. Arindra Basu of CIS, the Center for Internet and Society, has recently written about, I think in May, wrote about how India's engagement has, how the WTO has really worked with trade rules that are of the pre-internet era, and they do not translate into policies in the digital world today, with digital trade being such a big reality of our lives. India, on its part, with a few other countries like South Africa, perhaps using BRICS as a forum, has been looking at how they can use data for development. That is the larger rhetoric. And they have spoken about data localization with undertones of nationalizing data. This was seen even in the non-personal data policy making, where the document really spoke about national data and nationalizing data. What does it mean for foreign players who invest in India or work in India, what happens to their data? How does data localization work? These are all nuances that are being debated as we speak. And much of the rhetoric has been aimed at securitizing, the larger economy. I mean, at this point, it becomes, so while these are the three different baskets of how India and within India, domestically, as well as outside of India, internationally, the country has been working on the data front in various ways. How do we even negotiate this interplay of the local and the global mediated by the national in the realm of data governance? This is something that perhaps requires some rumination. And towards that, this is where I would like to bring in what this idea that I started off with, which is deliberative democracy studies and this digital turn. The pandemic, with all the unfortunate incidents that have been brought about by the pandemic. With that, we also have seen that the digital turn has been accentuated in a big way. We are seeing that the government is pushing for digitization of various policy processes and consultative practices. We, in some ways, it has allowed people like us, people who have access to these digital infrastructures, to engage in these larger debates, because otherwise one doesn't have access to these policy-making venues, which are often conducted, which are often held in the administrative nerve center of Delhi. But having said that, access is a continuous, and access and the digital divide continue to shape opportunities for deliberation, for citizen engagement, and the deliberative potential of the policy ecology for something like non-personal data besides these other spaces. In some ways, we're also seeing the professionalization of policy processes with a growing number of organizations who are now serving as outsourced units of what is otherwise the government's role in policy. We are seeing that organizations under the garb of supporting governance processes are in fact taking on the role of the government in making policy for the rest of India, for the people of India. And we're seeing this happen in a very professional fashion. And therefore, what would a truly digital deliberative democracy even look like? I mean, can we even think of something like that at this point? And that brings me to some critical reflections. The first of which is that there has been this euphoric hailing of digital democracy in general. We are talking about how we can have participatory processes online now without giving a thought to the huge digital divide that continues to be a reality. We only have about 50+%, and that is what is recently shown on the internet, that we have only about 50% of the population that has been covered by digitization in some way. It's in terms of some kind of access, including mobile phone access, mobile data access, internet data access. So we are really talking about excluding, the rest of the 50%, and that does not seem to feature in the conversations anymore, because there has been this euphoric hailing of digital democracy with, of course, with Aadhaar, and this is a long-standing debate, but with something like the digital health ID in a big way. Similarly, we have a number of processes that were underway during the pandemic, which saw the move towards digitizing various aspects of governance. In all of this, the idea of deliberation seems to have been underserved and ignored. And I'd like to end on this note, where I'd like to really point to this particular input by King and Murray, which is conceptualizing the idea of human security. And this is, again, something that I've been working with over the last couple of years, drawing from the larger frameworks of critical security studies, because much of the conversation is really about national security and nationalization of data and national interests and national development and development of cities and urban spaces, etc. We seem, and also the larger rhetoric on who citizens are, we seem to really have forgotten the idea of the human, who could be a non-citizen, right? And therefore, this is where the idea of human security and conceptualizing human security, where we uphold the human and associated rights, proprietary and otherwise, in favor of what is data democracy, which is premised on deliberation, is the need of the hour. This is really in recognition of the epistemic value of argumentation and rationality, and of course, non-rationality in the sense of alluding to the immaterial in a number of ways, where we absorb and reflect on commonly shared ideas, commonly shared aspirations in favor of the human. And I think this is what would sort of tie it to the larger premise and the true spirit of this conference, which is Pramāna, where we are looking at, some kind of a rational dealing with our current predicaments in a lot of ways. The biggest of which, in my opinion, today is this process of datafication. With that, I'll end my intervention here, and I look forward to any questions or comments that may follow in the question and answer round. Thank you so much again for this opportunity and for being such an indulgent audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Preeti. The floor is now open for questions. May I invite Dr. Bedurya Chakrabarti for a few questions with our guests?
Thank you, Juhi. So I will get the ball rolling. I have a question for both Preeti and Dr. Nico. So let me start with Preeti. So the thing I was thinking about, the depth in which you are thinking about the question of deliberative democracy and datafication was quite enlightening. And I was thinking that one of the biggest problems maybe of our lives in today's contemporary states is that our normative models, the 18th century models of thinking about the relation between the citizens and states, are essentially have been made redundant by the contemporary state. In a lot of sense, this entire idea of constitutionalism, the idea that state is a reflection of people's interests. One can even say that today we are the reflection of state's interest. It's exactly the opposite, right? Generally in the concept of deliberation, there is a sense of immediacy. That is,
I seem to have dropped off.
I think Dr. Chakrabarti is experiencing something.
Okay.
We'll wait for a couple of seconds and see how that goes.
This is, of course, the worst possible moment to freeze, right? In the middle of a question. Now we all have to wait for the second half.
Yes, he's back.
I'm very sorry. Somewhere the connection went away. Is this better now? Am I audible? Yeah. So what I was saying is that, the sort of 18th century ideas of deliberation, constitution, and so on, and today's reality is slightly different, right? So when we are thinking about something like deliberation, there is also that sort of very fundamental Foucaultian concept of governmentality, which is conduct of conduct, right? So we live in a situation where the state, the media, and all these things can actually, in a very granular way, influence the way people think about all of these things, data, the question of right. I mean, for example, when we talk about, putting the state's self-interest above the citizen's self-interest, this goes on hand in hand with a very, very deep sort of inculcation of the very same value within the citizens. The citizens literally believe that that's what it matters, that the state should come before the citizen, right? And along with the ideologies of sacrifice and so on, and security and so on. So my question is that while we are thinking about, of course, this deep datafication and deliberative democracy, how does deliberative democracy, and you are also talking about professionalism of policy making, which is another level of, that sort of redundancy of the classical state model. So in that kind of situation, how does the deliberative democracy model in datafication work without the component of a certain push towards learning and unlearning That is, how do we make the actors of this entire deliberation know what is actually happening with it? Because, how does rationality or Pramāna, whatever, arise without that kind of deep unlearning against the hegemonic push to say that nothing really serious is going on. It's all fine, right?
Right. Thank you for that. Well, I mean, I'll start off with two caveats. One is I'm an eternal optimist, and I will still believe that we do, and we have seen instances of pushback against, these forms of datafication. Of course, we are dealing with a relentless push towards it from the state, but we do have a pushback from various quarters of civil society or whatever is left of remnants of whatever we have of civil society in various ways. That's the first caveat. And the second is, this is of course the classic tussle between a Foucauldian understanding and a Habermasian or a public sphere kind of an understanding, where this is not to privilege only those who are self-aware and or whatever that means, and those who are able to reflect in very concrete terms on occurrences of the day with respect to governance. But I do believe that inherently there is that human-centric wisdom that seems to continue to hold sway when these larger processes of, such as datafication, we are faced with all of that. Especially because most of it is not operating from a space of an inclusive kind of an ideal, but chooses to exclude and create the ideal citizen in that sense. So having said that, we have seen protests against, a number of initiatives that have taken place over the last few years. And I think therein lies the optimism and the hope to tap into that inherent human-centric wisdom towards securing the human in the face of this avalanche that we are seeing today. So I'm hoping that one can tap into that for to draw on that spirit to deal with this avalanche in some sense.
Okay, thank you. Jui, can I ask my question to Nico?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, my question, it's a very simple, really question, which is that it was very exciting for me to look at this, paradigm of presentation, art-based research. But my question is slightly more from a pragmatic perspective of being a university-bound academic in the global South, where the value of our knowledge production, quote unquote, is also connected to certain sort of matrices of evaluation, right? And I'm literally thinking here of that word called scopus. All of our necks are on the block of scopus. So my question simply is that, especially in the context in which you are working in Europe, the global north, how are you thinking about changing the patterns of evaluation of academic work to include things like art-based research? How is that going? How are the powers that are thinking about this, and how can we actually bring that question into the global South? Because for us, it just comes like that, right?
No, thanks. It's a very good question and a very difficult question to answer at the same time, which probably makes it a good question. And I give you some snippets of an answer. I think that, first of all, I think that whenever I speak about arts-based research, I speak from a position of privilege, in the sense that I'm not a junior scholar that has to work on building a CV, and that needs a series of publications, traditional written texts, to get a job. I mean, let's be fair. This is basically what it's about. And so I do have that luxury of being able to experiment more, as I'm maybe slightly less bound by some of these requirements. So I am very much aware that I speak of position of privilege, not just in north-south debates, but actually in career path debates. And there is in your question, I think, a very wise warning saying that one should be careful to balance academic work and not to abandon any kind of, say, traditional publication efforts. I think that's one story. Secondly, if you look at the European scene, university landscape, then I think that there's good news and bad news in the sense that a lot of the registration databases that I have been working with, because I was located at particular universities, they do now acknowledge that there is something like artistic research, which opens up the door for integrating arts-based research into these databases so that at least they get registered. And of course, the next step is for them to be validated and not just registered, but at least what I've seen, for instance, in Brussels University, in Charles University, what I've seen there is that these databases have been adjusted so that this kind of work can at least be made visible. But we do still have, in these European countries, we do have serious problems in the validation of this kind of work. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that I think that these practices are also opening up debates, not just about what is actually academic work, but what needs to be validated as academic work, and how do we want to be validated. And I think this brings us to a much broader discussion, because I think that the quantification of academic research is deeply problematic. I, as an individual scholar, I do not want to be evaluated purely on metrics, because I think that is irrelevant and even counterproductive when it comes to academic work. And actually, going back to Preti's distinction between Habermasian and Foucauldian approaches, I think we could use a bit more of a Foucauldian approach towards these metrics. And we should acknowledge in a very Foucauldian way that we ourselves are implicated in creating surveillance systems that then actually damage what we think and should do for our societies. So I think that arts-based research is one of these areas where this debate is opened up, where we are forced to say, like, look, we want to do something else and that needs to be validated. But more in general, we need to validate our work in a very different way. We need to go back to, I think, a validation system where peers, academics, actually acknowledge the quality of each other's work, not driven by pure statistics, which don't make any sense whatsoever if we want to understand the role of academia in society. So we need a little revolution, I would argue, but hey, I think you were expecting that from me.
Right, that does also answer one of the questions that we have, that how will arts-based research survive the conventional review, peer review process that we have in publications right now? So,
if I may, very quickly, because I think just a footnote, I think that the review process of arts-based research is extremely interesting because it opens up all sorts of very strange problems. I just had a video which sort of, it's a video, academic video essay just approved for publication in a video journal. And how to review a video, right? What does that mean? Do you actually then tell the author, me, can you please change the video because you need to add something? Can you please redo all your work? I mean, that produces all sorts of problems in thinking through what a peer review needs to be. So it opens up also questions about what does a peer review mean and how does that actually impact on a video essay, for instance, that then needs to be adjusted to deal with the peer review and what kind of work is then expected in a revision. It's a fascinating area as well, and it opens up really interesting questions. Also for me now, as this weekend I probably end up re-recording some of the parts of that video.
Right. Coming back to Dr. Preeti, the issue of authenticity and access to data is one of the hurdles in policy making. It was highlighted by 200 scientists in India who wrote to Prime Minister Modi for their inability to access it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course. This is, of course, the other side of the need for, whatever authentic data is in truly scientific terms, right? And this was only seen very clearly and evidently during the pandemic, when we were struggling with not having access to enough data for formulating policies around vaccination, for formulating policies that inform scientific endeavors, etc. So, of course, this brings us back to the need for recognizing the critical role that truly scientific work and academic work, would mean for any society. And when I say scientific work, I mean access to authentic information that is based on not on, this euphoric affirmation of what is today, the kind of datafication we are seeing today, but actual data that is then used for ethical purposes. I think this underscores the need for that kind of ethics in this process of datafication that we are anyway a part of, to again take that Foucauldian kind of a turn.
Continuing with, when we're speaking of ethics, a couple of questions that have popped up here is that if can technology interventions like blockchain be used for data privacy?
Well, I do not know, the technicalities of blockchain and, other such technologies, but I am deeply disturbed by, if you've seen the policy making landscape in India, at least over the last 4-5 years, we've seen that there have been a slew of measures. There is this huge flux in the policy space where we are suddenly contending with these numerous technologies. We're dealing with crypto technology, we're dealing with blockchain, and we're trying to incorporate all of that into our governance systems, where there is this huge chasm between what is the reality of the public discourse around it and the kind of access that the government, and which is not a monolith but functions like one today, has. Of course, there is a corporate government nexus in a big way in pushing for certain technologies in governance, but there seems to be no uptake beyond certain quarters, for this in the larger society. And the fact that we are unaware of this chasm is what is very, very worrying more than anything. So I do not know about the merits of the technical aspects of blockchain, but I can only comment on the fact that policy making seems to be happening for it in a different realm, which is very, very far removed from the current realities of our everyday lives in this democracy today.
Right. And in that case, it comes with a price to pay, right? You have to choose between privacy versus poverty. The question that comes up is what's happening in China right now.
Privacy versus poverty, you said?
Yeah.
Well, I think I did read a paper where they did say that the assumption is that the poor do not care about their privacy, which is a fallacy. The poor, as much as everybody else, would care about their privacy. And therefore, I do think that this is a redundant debate between what we call privacy and what we call poverty. Anybody should have access to delineating what is on offer in terms of their data, the data from their lives, their everyday living, to whichever authority it is. And China, I do not know the path that we choose to take, but as a country, but we do have some great examples of democracy building endeavors going back to the Constituent Assembly debates. That is really the spirit of which I would like to invoke. I'm not saying that one has to be a skeptic of technology or a skeptic of any new kind of innovation in that sense. But the fact that there is no larger reflection on it, on what it means to jump towards these measures and adopt them without ensuring that everybody is on board or without adequate discussion, I think that is what is worrisome. The process of and the practices around the governance of these technologies, I think that is what is worrisome, the making of these policies.
Right. I hope that resolves a lot of queries, Tamal. We have Namita who wish to ask a question. Namita, if you're here. All right. Moving on, a couple of questions for Dr. Carpentier for you. One of the concepts in your presentation reminded one of your attendees is that of interwoven learning. Would research then not be the tip of a learning pyramid in the university where we encourage students to incorporate visual and performance art into their assignment work?
And I think that the very simple answer would be yes, we should. In practice, it's not that simple. But I'm actually now running a course in a master program, which is called MARS, Media and Area Studies. The course is the introduction into post-colonial theory, and which is fun to teach. But one of the assignments that students are sort of exposed to is the building of a virtual exhibition. So they're actually expected to translate their analysis, their theoretical and conceptual work into case studies, and then need to find a way of integrating photography in that and build an exhibition together as a team of students. That's actually ongoing right now. It's one of these other little projects. So yes, it is possible. It does require, I think, some creativity from all involved. And I think we need to open up our minds slightly, experiment. And that also means we need to be willing to fail once in a while. It is not an easy process to move away from, again, the written text, the paper evaluation, or in some countries where that model of the oral evaluation, the oral exam is still very dominant. We could complement that by other kinds of assignments and other ways of teaching, which also means different ways of learning. I think one of the mistakes that we've often made is that we underestimate our creativity, both as teachers and as students. We are many things. We have our own vocations, and we obviously want to save the planet, either at the level of democracy or environment, and I think that's more than legitimate. But we also are engaged in a creative profession. And that creative profession is partially reduced to writing. And I think that reduction is something that I want to expose and open up again. Again, not replacing writing by other techniques, but complementing it. And there, I think that, again, this idea of hybridity is important, and we should acknowledge our creativity, but also we should trust our students. I think this is one of the basic problems where we, from our perspective, have decided that we should not, and we should not use their creativity, and we should not go on these experimental trajectories with our students. So yeah, this is a very long version of a simple, yes, of course we should try. And we will fail, and we will make mistakes, and we will learn, and we will get better. And then we will, I think, be able to create learning experiences that are more integrated, interwoven, and that are to the benefit of all.
Right. Speaking as somebody who's really at a very early stage of their research journey, a few of my colleagues have asked, what should one take into consideration, be prepared for the kind of challenges that come with taking up art-based research? Any personal anecdotes, any personal experiences that you could share with us, that could prepare us to face those challenges that might come?
Oh, they're endless. And I think before you go on to any kind of experiment, you should always sort of think about that. And it's not because I'm enthusiastic about it that the entire planet should be enthusiastic about it. I think that's a big disclaimer. You have to be comfortable with this. And that's the big, I think the biggest disclaimer, or the biggest warning I can give. In my sense, and it's maybe not a personal anecdote, but much more personal experience. In my sense, the idea of reaching out to artists, but also to the artistic field, is something that you need to plan and do very carefully. You need to organize that. For instance, the photography work that I was referring to in Iconoclastic Controversies, I first published that in a cultural magazine because I was very curious to see how they would respond to my photographic work. And it's still an academic analysis. It's not just aesthetics or just photography. It is integrated into academic procedures of generating knowledge. And I was very curious how that would work and how people from outside academia would look at it. And so I created a series of dialogues with people from the artistic field, just out of pure curiosity, testing the grounds and trying to figure out how the response would be. Luckily for me, they were happy with it and they said, yeah, go for it, which was for me also very reassuring. So one of the big problems, to now talk in more abstract terms, is that when you enter into different fields, you have different validation mechanisms that are belonging to these different fields. And we might not always be aware of all the sensitivities that are part of another field because we're not trained in that field. So when you enter into that field, you can't just take your own validation criteria with you and say, oh, I want to be evaluated on the basis of my criteria, because that's not how it works. What it does actually require is for anybody that is in this academic position to learn about validation criteria of other fields and learn how to deal with them and learn to mediate and navigate through these different evaluation systems. And I think I found that actually not necessarily a problem. I found that extremely enriching because it questions everything that you take for granted, right? All the criteria that we are sort of constantly confronted with and that we oppose in some cases, previous answer, they don't hold that well in another field. They're just completely different. And that allows you also to question a lot of the mechanisms that you take for granted as an academic. And I found that very stimulating, but it is a matter of finding your way through these different validation systems. And that's not an easy thing to do, I should add. But thanks, it's a brilliant question.
Right. But the next question is that as media and communication professionals, what for you has been the most effective way of advocating the idea of unsilencing nature?
That's a good one, because in a way, I think this is also where we can talk about deliberation and participation. So what I've started to work on in more recent years, because I have been working quite a lot on participation and decentralizing power relationships, was a very simple question like, is this participatory theory not anthropocentric? And how do we deal with the other parts of the world that are obviously not human? How do we ensure rights of animals? I think that's where the big questions for me come in. And these are not easy questions because obviously human animals and non-human animals are structurally different, and human animals, to use a politically correct term, are in very strong power positions. And changing that is extremely difficult. And there is a whole range of reform projects that try to change how we think about the world of animals, how we move away from what is called an anthropocentric perspective to an ecocentric perspective. Some of these projects are extremely radical. You have animal liberation movements, which in some cases actually use violent methods to reconfigure that power balance. But then you have, I think, more gentle versions that try to at least change the way we think about ourselves and the animal world. And I think in the context of a global climate crisis, but I would actually argue in the context of a crisis of human nature relationships, because I think that's actually the bigger picture, we really need to start rethinking these. So that's the very broad context. I'm not into breaking into laboratories and setting animals free. It's not my kind of thing. I understand why people do it. I don't appreciate the use of violence, though. So it's not my kind of thing. What I find most important is to try to create projects, also educational moments where people can start thinking about how can I take the position of a particular animal. And this is when I was working about wolves. I started calling it a lupocentric position, right? The position of the wolf. How can you, still being a human, because obviously we never stop being humans when we try to democratize our relationships with nature. But how can I take an empathic position? How can I speak from the position of the animal, defending the interest of the animal, not defending the interest of humans? And that's an incredibly challenging way of thinking that I found very helpful also in my more theoretical work on participation and the integration of the animal world in different legal orders, for instance. So I don't think there is one effective idea. I think we need a whole range of strategies. But I'm very interested in changing the discourse, our ways of thinking about animal by creating practices that allow us to take a position of particular animals and to defend the interest of these animals in a very unbalanced power relationship with humans, and to readdress that power relationship at least a bit. But thanks for that question. It's something that is dear to me.
We have Neha, who's willing to ask a question. Neha? So the question that has popped up is, Dr. Carpentier, your presentation also talked about experiencing knowledge. Now, when one thinks about reading your traditional text, written text papers, there's a certain assumption that there's a very, direct, immediate transference of creation of meaning or understanding. And while when it comes to art-based research, that experience could be very subjective. How does one deal with, how does one navigate with that subjectivity of the reader, of the experience, of the person who's experiencing that?
Well, there's I think first a comment on the first part of your question, because of course, obviously you're right. We assume quite often that if we have somebody reading our work, the communication is linear and there's a full understanding of our ideas. Now, having been in the academic field for a while, and some people have been quoting and actually using my work, the number of misunderstandings is immense. There is no direct link. I mean, and that misunderstanding, I think, is extremely important because it's creative. So I'm not discrediting these misunderstandings. On the contrary, I think people should use my work or other people's work in the way they seem fit and the way they want, whether it's close to the original intention of the author or not. But I don't think we should fetishize the written text as pure and easy communication. It doesn't work like that. It's sometimes the opposite. So I think that the dichotomy between objective and subjective knowledge transfer is deeply problematic. I think there's always a process of interpretation, and that interpretation has components of subjectivity in it, and we should not fetishize the written text as being outside the logics of interpretation. That's one thing. But secondly, if you start, of course, using more open texts, right? Remember the work from people like Roland Barthes about open and closed texts, about readerly and writerly texts. All these discussions, of course, arts-based research is more open. And I think that is one of the bigger challenges of using arts-based research, because if you make it too open, then you stop actually communicating academic knowledge. And so the challenge there is to find the balance between more open and closed text, acknowledging the process of interpretation, but at the same time still, as an academic or as an artist, trying to communicate a particular idea. Just to not to go into an endless discussion, but if you take the Mirror Palace of Democracy installation, you went inside a mirror palace, and that mirror palace was bombarding you with ideological messages that were contradictory. I would argue that that was still a fairly closed text, because there were actually videos playing there with very, very particular ideological messages. And I think that was not totally open. But if you would then talk to visitors, they came up with obviously very different interpretations. But that's a dynamics that we do not escape from in written academic communication. The thing is that we simply use a different repertoire to communicate and to allow people, in this case, entering with their bodies inside an installation and having that experience. We allow people to interpret, and I think that's a good and democratic thing to do.
All right. That has been insightful. And our last question for the day is for you, Dr. Raghunath. Is data privacy in present time a crucial part when we put in data on any app or any search engine?
Well, I mean, it is indeed a crucial part, but I think the key thing there is, how do you make those who are collecting this data more responsible? I mean, that is the crucial part, I think. Of course, it is a given that, I mean, there is a lot of conversation around privacy, and has been there for a long time now. But I think we have to find ways of ensuring that, I mean, the conversation goes, I mean, of course, it is a given now that privacy is important, but how do we go beyond that to create actionables for big tech, for instance, in the way they glean data or use our data? Can we create standards? Can we create protocols for that? I mean, I think that is where we need to put our energies, going ahead.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Preeti. Thank you so much, Dr. Nico. We'll end our session here. This has been extremely insightful, interesting, and personally for me, my horizons have been broadened so much. There's so much that I can think about. Leaves me with a lot to introspect and go and read. I'm actually very thrilled to have attended this session, and I'm hoping that that has been the case for almost all of our attendees. We'll break for lunch here, and we're really glad you could join us, and we hope to see you soon and interact with you more in the future. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much for inviting us, and for a wonderful conversation, and for all the enthusiasm that you just displayed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll break for lunch here and reconvene at 2 for our 3-track sessions wherein we have paper presentations. So bon appetit, everyone, and we'll see you after lunch at 2 o'clock. Bye-bye.